Hi everyone, welcome back to Steve's View. Today, I want to break down a really important idea about American politics that often gets talked about in a simplified way, especially in discussions about the modern conservative movement and the rise of Donald Trump. The core claim goes something like this. The American right has built a powerful ideological coalition, but it is weaker when it comes to the unglamorous, ground-level work of political organization. Meanwhile, the left, especially the Democratic Party ecosystem, has historically been more effective at building durable grassroots infrastructure. Now, there's a lot of truth in that observation, but it also needs to be unpacked carefully because if you simplify it too much, you end up with a misleading story about one side understands politics, the other doesn't. And that's not actually what's happening. So let's go deeper. At the center of this argument is a distinction that often gets overlooked in modern political commentary. Politics is not just about ideas. Politics is about organization. Ideas matter, of course they do. But ideas don't automatically turn into power. They only become power when they are connected to systems that can do something with them, recruit people, mobilize voters, train candidates, raise money, and sustain effort over time. And this is where the critique of the American right becomes interesting. The argument is that modern conservatism has often been very strong at producing ideas, messaging, media content, and ideological debates, but less consistent when it comes to the slow, technical, and often boring machinery of political organization. Things like voter registration drives, precinct-level organizing, local school board races, candidate pipelines, community-level coordination, long-term party infrastructure. These are not glamorous activities. Nobody goes viral for spending 10 years building county-level voter databases, but those are exactly the things that decide elections. Now, to be fair, this is not unique to the right. American politics in general has become more media-driven and less institutionally rooted over time. Social media rewards expression, not organization. Podcasts reward commentary, not coordination. YouTube rewards influence, not infrastructure. So it's very easy for any political movement, left or right, to confuse visibility with power. You can have 1 million followers and still not have a single organized precinct operation in a swing district. That gap between attention and organization is one of the defining features of modern democracy. But the original argument makes a stronger claim that the conservative movement is particularly vulnerable to this imbalance. And there's a reason people say that. A lot of conservative political energy, especially in the last decade, has flowed into media ecosystems, commentary channels, talk radio, digital influencers, culture war debates, and ideological messaging. That creates intensity, but not always structure. Meanwhile, the opposing view argues that the modern American left, especially through the institutional ecosystem of the Democratic Party and affiliated civil society networks, has historically invested more consistently in long-term ground infrastructure. That includes labor unions, advocacy groups, local political committees, and community-based organizing. And if you look at political history in the United States, this pattern becomes clearer. Take the American civil rights movement. When people think about it, they think about speeches, especially the iconic leadership of Martin Luther King Jr. But speeches alone don't move history. Behind those speeches was an entire organizational ecosystem. Church networks that could mobilize thousands of people quickly, student organizations that coordinated sit-ins and protests, training systems that taught nonviolent resistance, local leadership structures across different states, logistics networks that sustained long campaigns. Without that infrastructure, the moral message would have remained just that, a message. Or take labor politics in the 20th century. Labor unions didn't become politically influential because their slogans were better. They became influential because they had dues-paying membership bases, disciplined organizational structures, coordinated bargaining power, long-term political alliances, the ability to deliver votes as a bloc. In other words, they weren't just expressing opinions, they were executing strategy. This is the key distinction that gets lost in modern political discourse. Commentary is not organization, and expression is not power. Now, here's where we need to be careful with the original claim. It is not accurate to say that one side organizes and the other side doesn't. That would be too simplistic. Because the American right also contains very powerful organizational systems. For example, religious networks, especially evangelical churches, have historically been some of the most effective grassroots mobilization systems in American politics. They operate continuously, not just during election season. They maintain community structures, communication channels, and cultural cohesion over decades. Similarly, gun rights organizations, local conservative activist groups, and certain state-level party machines are highly effective at turnout operations and voter mobilization. If conservatives truly lacked organizational capacity, they would not be competitive in national elections at all, and clearly they are. So, the more accurate way to describe the situation is not one side organizes and the other doesn't. It is this: different parts of the American right have different strengths, and there has been a persistent tension between cultural influence and institutional infrastructure. Some parts of the movement excel at messaging and ideological persuasion, but underinvest in long-term structural work. Other parts are highly organized, but less visible in public discourse. And that imbalance creates strategic problems. Because in modern politics, cultural influence alone is not enough. A viral video does not become a voting bloc by itself. A popular argument does not become a legislative agenda automatically. And winning a debate online does not translate into winning a school board election in Ohio or a county commission race in Wisconsin. Those are different systems entirely. This is where the idea of hard power politics comes in. In today's environment, political success is less about who has the most compelling philosophy and more about who can consistently convert political energy into organized action. That means turning supporters into volunteers, turning volunteers into precinct captains, turning ideas into candidate pipelines, turning enthusiasm into turnout operations. And that process is slow, repetitive, and often invisible, which is why many movements neglect it. But here is another important correction to the original argument. It is not enough to say, just organize more, because organization without ideas can also become hollow. History shows that the most successful political movements are not purely organizational machines. They combine two things: a compelling narrative about what society should be, and a structure capable of implementing that narrative. Take the civil rights movement again. It had moral clarity, equal rights, and dignity. And it had organizational depth, churches, activists, and local networks. Or the New Deal coalition in the United States. It had a clear idea, economic security, in response to crisis. And it had institutional power, labor unions, urban political machines, and state-level coordination. Or the conservative realignment in the Reagan era. It had ideological clarity, smaller government, stronger national identity, and it had organizational support, think tanks, donor networks, religious coalitions, and candidate pipelines. So the real lesson is not ideas versus organization. It is: ideas give direction. Organization gives durability. And when you separate them, politics breaks down in different ways. If you only have ideas without organization, you get endless commentary, podcasts, and intellectual debates, but very little real-world change. If you only have organization without ideas, you get efficient power structures but no meaningful vision guiding them. Now, let's return to the modern American right and the tension it is facing. The argument is that a major part of the current conservative coalition was built around a very strong emotional and political reaction to issues like globalization, immigration, cultural change, and distrust of institutions. That coalition has been politically powerful. But coalitions built on intensity face a long-term challenge: expectations. Supporters are not voting for incremental adjustments. They are often voting for large-scale transformation on immigration, trade, corruption, foreign policy, and national identity. And when political systems are unable to deliver rapid, visible transformation, frustration builds. That is not unique to any one movement. It happens everywhere. But it is especially important in populist-style coalitions where expectations are high and timelines are short. So the stability of the coalition depends on something very simple. Can political power be translated into visible outcomes? If the answer is yes, coalitions stabilize. If the answer is no, coalitions fragment. This is where leadership style matters. Supporters of Donald Trump often argue that his political strength comes from his ability to directly tap into public frustration and translate it into a unified political force. But that is only the first step. The harder step is what comes after, turning that force into sustained institutional change. And that is where every political movement, left or right, runs into the same reality. Winning elections is not the same as governing systems. And governing systems is not the same as transforming them. This is also why the hard power politics framing can be misleading if taken too far, because it can create the impression that politics is just about control, who has it, who doesn't, and how to use it. But democratic politics is more complicated. Power in a democracy is fragmented across institutions, courts, states, media, civil society, and bureaucracies. No single actor fully controls the system. So, even if a coalition wins elections, it still has to work through layers of structure that require patience, negotiation, and organization. Which brings us back to the original insight, but in a more precise form. The real issue is not that one side understands power and the other does not. The real issue is that modern political success requires a balance between three things: ideas that can mobilize people, organizations that can sustain effort, and institutions that can convert effort into policy. When any one of those is missing, the system becomes unstable. And finally, there is a broader takeaway here that goes beyond American politics. This applies to any political movement in any country at any time, because democracy has a very consistent pattern. You do not win by being right. You win by being organized. But you also do not last by being organized alone. You last by building an alignment between what people believe, what they are willing to do, and what institutions are capable of delivering. And that alignment is not created overnight. It is built slowly in neighborhoods, in communities, in local elections, in candidate recruitment, in long-term trust networks. The unglamorous work is often the decisive work, not the speech, not the viral moment, not the debate win, but the person knocking on doors in a suburban district in a low-turnout election year, the volunteer registering voters at a community event, the local organizer sitting through meetings for years before anyone pays attention. That is where political power actually lives. And once you see politics through that lens, a lot of debates about ideology start to look incomplete. Because ideology may explain what people want, but organization explains what actually happens. Thanks for watching.